Okay, so my topic today is agile ways of working. Okay, I'm going to steal this. If anyone was at Victor's Scrum refresher a couple of weeks ago, you'll recognize that I've kind of stolen this first illustration from him. So yeah, I apologize to Victor, and yeah, anyone else can feel free to steal it. So if I came up to you and said, you know, I have the solution, I'm sure your next comment would be, well, what's the issue, or what's the problem, or what's the challenge? Or if I came up to you and said, you know, I've got the answer, you know, your next response would be, well, what's the question? So obviously, the best solution really depends on the question that's being asked. So let's look at a couple of examples. Okay, so the challenge here is, how do I climb Everest? Now, if as a solution I said, well, just make your way there, get to base camp, and give it your best shot, that's not very good advice. That's, you know, it's quite a dangerous thing to start doing, and you probably really need a lot more than that. So a correct solution would probably involve quite a lot of upfront planning. It would involve a lot of safety considerations, discussions with experts. You'd have to know what the weather was going to be like. You'd have to plan your route. You'd have to make sure you had the correct equipment, the correct nutrition. So that's for climbing Everest. Okay, well, what if the challenge was, how do I learn to ride a bike? So if I then said, oh, you're going to need a lot of detailed upfront planning, well, that's not quite true. Riding a bike is actually a fairly simple activity, and there's not a massive amount of danger involved. So actually the correct solution would probably be more like, well, get outside and have a go. In terms of safety considerations, well, you might need a helmet, you might need stabilizers at the start. In terms of experts, well, your parents maybe, older siblings. But yeah, just a reminder what my topic is so I don't go off at a massive tangent. So if you search for Agile on Google, you'll find a lot about Agile solutions and Agile answers. So a good follow-up thing would be to say, well, if Agile's the answer, then what's the question? Well, let's first define our scope. So today we're going to talk about software. Now, the Agile approach has been applied to a lot of different industries, but it was actually started by people within the software industry. And it was actually a response to some of the challenges that industry faced. And so, yeah, today we're just going to focus on how Agile approaches can be applied to software development. So again, let's return to the question. If Agile's the answer, what's the question? So we're talking about great software. How can we build it and how can we deliver it? Now, let's look at what happened before Agile came along. Actually, the main way that this question was answered was actually by something called a Waterfall Model. It was called a Waterfall Model because it had a number of phases, and you almost went through the phases as if you were going down a waterfall. And the idea behind this model was, if you can execute each of these phases correctly, at the end, you're going to get great software. Now, did this actually work? Well, I think it had mixed results. Sometimes, yeah, good software was produced, but other times there were issues with badly defined requirements. And when you got an issue at that stage, that just cascaded down all the subsequent stages. There was also an issue with this model when it came to responsiveness to change. What if the user changes their mind about what they want? That means a lot of reworks involved. That means you basically got to go through, especially if it's at a late stage, you have to go through each of these phases and make the relevant changes. So yeah, the waterfall model wasn't necessarily very good when it came to the user making changes. Okay, so then how does the Agile approach answer this question? How can we build and how can we deliver great software? Does it replace the waterfall model with a different model, maybe an Agile model? Well, no. Actually, one of the big things that the Agile approach does is it replaces a model with users. So it actually puts user satisfaction at the center. So it's like, how can we make the user happy? Let's get to know them. Let's spend time getting to know the users. Let's know their experiences. Let's know their dreams, their aspirations. Let's know what they need. Let's find out about their behaviors. Now, why is all this so important? Well, actually, that's who the software's for. And so the better you know them, the better that you can actually build and deliver software that kind of meets their needs. So that's all about finding out what's important to the user. Where do we go next? Do we go to techniques and technologies? Well, not quite. The Agile approach says that before we do that, we need to actually consider what's most important to an organization and the individuals within that organization. They call these the Agile core values, but you can also think of it as an Agile mindset or Agile thinking. So a lot of these core values are almost contrasted with the things that were seen to be most important in the Waterfall model. So with the Waterfall model, processes and tools were very important. At each stage, you had different processes, and all the processes had different tools to enable them. Now, obviously, we need processes and tools, but it got to a point where these became so many and so complicated that it was difficult for people to understand and for people to use. So the Agile approach says, yeah, processes and tools are important, but what's even more important are individuals and interactions. It's actually individuals who are asking the question, how can we build and deliver great software? Processes and tools aren't asking that question. It's actually individuals who are asking the question, how can we deliver value for the user? So actually, it's a good idea for those individuals within the organization to interact with each other as much as possible and just to keep each other on the right track and say, actually, are we delivering value for the user? How can we do this better? Now, Agile isn't against processes and tools. Tools are actually there to make our life easier. So if they do, then yeah, let's use them. And also processes are basically there to make sure that individuals are speaking a common language. So actually how one person thinks about a journey is matches with how another person thinks about a journey. But those processes shouldn't be too complicated. And those processes also shouldn't get in the way of just the normal, either, well, I say face-to-face interaction, but obviously with remote working, that's more going to be like interaction via chat or via a call. So the waterfall model prioritized comprehensive documentation. The idea there was that actually, if we can document everything, then we can solve the problems in the documentation, and then building the product's going to be easy. The issue with that is that, yeah, obviously, if you've got a lot of documentation and then the user makes a change, there's a lot of updates to be made. The Agile approach says actually documentation is important, but what's more important is working software. That's really what the users asked for. So actually at each stage of Agile development, the focus is always on working software. Now, I suppose a good question would be, so is documentation not important? Do we not need it? Well, you do need documentation, but the documentation should be simple and it should be basically enough for the next iteration of working software. Sorry if I'm introducing jargon there. But essentially you're constantly delivering the working software to the user. And if the product is at a very early stage of development, if it's very small, if it's very simple, probably the documentation should be small and simple as well. And the issue with the waterfall model is you could have like 6 months worth of documentation and only like a very small, simple product. Whereas the Agile approach actually says, actually, the documentation should grow with the software as the software grows, the documentation grows to support it. So with the waterfall model, there was also a big emphasis on contract negotiation. So with negotiation, I think the idea is that you're almost on opposite sides. So you're trying to win, and unfortunately, someone has to lose. And I suppose the way some people go about this is win by any means necessary. Now, the Agile approach recognizes the value in contract negotiation. There are things that need to be agreed: the price, the license agreement. But actually, what's more important in an Agile approach is customer collaboration. If we're trying to make the customer happy and trying to deliver value for them, then we're kind of trying to create a win-win situation. So yes, there are costs involved, but we're trying to convince the customer that actually there's a value there. So even though you have to pay for something, the value, that thing is really valuable to you. It's worth a lot more than you're paying for it. And from our perspective, if we build something that actually works for the customer, they become like a living advert for us. Then the waterfall model prioritized following a plan. So you had all those stages, and it was important to proceed through those stages in a linear way. The Agile approach says, yeah, actually, a plan's important. It helps to know where you're starting, what your destination is, and it helps to have like a few milestones along the way. But that plan shouldn't be so rigid that it actually works to the detriment of the user. That actually, what's even more important than following a plan is responding to change. So if the user does change their minds, then the people involved in building the product have to be prepared to put the effort in to actually respond to those changes. And a lot of that comes with working closely with the user. So those are the core values of the Agile approach. And yeah, we'll now come to methods. So if we look at it so far, it's like the things that we've covered are almost the commitments that are part of the Agile approach. There's a commitment to delivering great software. There's a commitment to delivering value for the user. There's a commitment to these core values. And now we're ready to look at the methods. And actually, when it comes to the methods, there's a lot of freedom here. You can choose lots of methods. You don't have to choose any of them. So the one that people on the Meet Mentees project will be familiar with is called Scrum. And then that's almost taking these agile values and almost applying them to software development and putting a bit more detail in them. And so if we take one aspect of Scrum, like sprints, and compare it with the waterfall model, in the waterfall model, a delivery cycle might take months. It could take 6 months from actually getting the requirements to actually getting something that the user can get their hands on. Whereas Scrum, because it uses sprints, it's actually trying to shorten that delivery cycle. And so all of the important activity happens within the sprint, and then there's something to deliver at the end. And so the good thing about a sprint is it means that, any issues or any problems can be caught early. And, for example, if you take like weekly sprints, how many weekly sprints could you do in 6 months? Well, if we take like 4 weeks in a month, pretty much, in 6 months, that's 24 sprints. So imagine actually how much learning and how much improvement could be done over 24 sprints compared to if that was just one delivery cycle. Scrum also has a lot to say about roles. So in a lot of organizations, there's a lot of hierarchy, and actually, there's a lot of layers between kind of senior management and the people who actually do the work. But if one of these Scrum values is individuals and interactions, one of the Agile values, then actually the way that Scrum only has 3 roles, product owner, Scrum master, and Scrum team, actually communication between all of those is supposed to be free and regular. So there aren't like a lot of complicated processes that you need to go through in order to get in touch with someone who can make a decision. Everyone can communicate with each other. So again, because these methods are optional, you can choose which methods suit your needs. Another agile method is called extreme programming. And this is more when you kind of get some of these agile values and then you specifically apply them to the area of programming or coding. So even this area, even extreme programming, it actually has its own values. It's, communication, simplicity, feedback, respect, and courage. And it also has its own practices like small releases and simple design. So you'll find that between these methods, there's a lot of overlap. And sometimes as you choose, you might think, actually, I want to take certain aspects from XP, certain aspects from Scrum. Like I said, in this area, you're quite free. Kanban is another methodology that might be useful for an organization. And really, Kanban's all about the visualization of tasks. So rather than basically what everyone's doing being hidden or kind of spread over a million spreadsheets, you've got a Kanban board, and that's accessible to the whole team. So the whole team can look at the activities that are going on and see, okay, which ones have just started, which ones are in progress, and which ones are complete. So it's a great visual way for the team to be able to track work, and also be able to see if there are any obstacles. And another possibility is lean, and that's more about applying the agile approach to processes. And so here you're trying to maximize customer value and minimize waste. So you want processes to be efficient and you want them to be simple. So that's pretty much it for like a general overview of the key aspects of Agile. The original topic was Agile ways of working, but it also could be rephrased as a question, which is, how do I work in an Agile way? And so when you rephrase a question like that, then you almost kind of go on this same tour, but maybe personalize it a bit more. So ways of working is quite a general phrase, but we could replace it with the word habits. Habits are things that we do regularly, sometimes subconsciously. But yeah, it's kind of the result of doing something a lot, it eventually becomes a habit. So we could then look at this and say, well, actually, how do I form agile habits? And then that also changes the original question you ask. You're actually looking at great software and you're asking, how can I help to build great software? And how can I help to deliver great software? So then you're actually looking at the user and asking, well, actually, how much do I know about our users? Do I know about their experiences and their aspirations? Do I know how my piece of work impacts the user? And then when you look at the core values, you're actually asking yourself, well, actually, what's most important to me? Which individuals do I work closely with, or do I work in similar areas with? And how often do I interact with them? And also with customer collaboration, do I see the users as like an enemy or an impediment, or do I actually see them as partners? And then when you kind of go through the methods and look at that on the personally, I suppose you can almost say, okay, if I look at Scrum, are there any particular aspects of Scrum that I think, yeah, actually this would be useful for me to know a bit more about? This would help me in my own work. Something like sprints, maybe that can help, because instead of spending time worrying what's going to happen in 6 months or a year's time, actually the majority of your focus is just on the next sprint, whether that's a week or 2 weeks or a month. Kanban, visualizing tasks. Instead of kind of getting to the position where you think, oh, I've forgotten what I'm supposed to be doing, or I don't know what's going on. Actually Kanban makes that really clear and in a visual way. And actually, these are all just examples. Like, you can actually find, like, other methods where people have tried to implement Agile and think, actually, maybe that would be good for the organization. Maybe I can suggest it. Or even if the organization doesn't take it up, maybe I could use it in my own personal work. So, yeah, that's everything, guys. Thanks for listening.